Welcome to Mind the Word, a space where everyone's welcome to share their experiences about language. You want to join me? Grab yourself a cup of tea and let's get started. So today we're going to talk about whether it's hard or easy to learn a language. Before we get into that, we have to think about really how we look at it. So if we look at it from the perspective of a baby, any baby can learn any language as long as they have the input to get started with that language. But I'm afraid that for us adults, it's a little bit harder. So when we start learning a language, when we are, let's say, 18, 20, or even a bit younger, when we are teenagers, we already have created a system in our brains that is gonna put something in the way. So sometimes it might be a little bit of a disruption. We already see the world in a specific way, and that's gonna get in the way of how we learn the other language. So for instance, think about myself. I'm a native Spanish speaker, and when I speak English, you will notice that I have certain accent when I talk, obviously. We've all been there, we've all learned another language, and you don't really sound like a native, right? So that's something that the accent, the way you hear the sounds and you produce them, that's something that you learn very early on, and it's very difficult to adapt to a new language system. But there's also something that goes a little bit harder in terms of when we make sentences, right? So sentences are just structures, and that's something that we sort of learn very early on. So for instance, in Spanish, you don't invert the order of the sentence, of the words in the sentence when you make a question, but in English you do. So for instance, I want a cup of tea. Do I want a cup of tea? In Spanish, you will say just the same sentence with a little bit of a different intonation. Quiero una taza de té. Quiero una taza de té. So that's something, a good example of how that can get in the way of learning another language. Another thing that is important to take into account is that everyone's different. Everyone has different ways to learn, and everyone is good at different things. So for instance, there are people that are especially good at learning languages. You may have heard of polyglots. A polyglot is someone who is fluent in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 languages. Yes, it happens. Trust me. I wish I could do that. I don't. But those are people that have special characteristics to, make them a little bit better at that. There are some people that are good at mathematics. There are some people that are good at remembering things. There's people that are good at learning languages. So it really depends on your own cognition, on your own experiences in life, and on your own motivation. And now talking about motivation, that is something that is so extremely important. I've talked about this so much when I teach Spanish to my students, and it's something that it really does play a role in language learning. So, for instance, I learned English when I was a young adult, I guess, and for me it was very easy to do. Well, not super easy, but it was easier to do just because I always liked how the English language sound. I loved and I still do watching movies and TV shows, and there was just so much out there that I could have access to if I learn English that it motivated me so much. And just thinking about how many people I could talk to in the world just by knowing that language, it really pushed me forward. However, I've had other experiences with learning other languages that have not been that successful. So, am I the same person? Yes, I am. But, for instance, I live in the Netherlands, and for me, it's been a complete different journey to learn that. Why is that? Well, because I feel different about that. I know that I don't need it all the time to go to the grocery store, and it hasn't increased my motivation as much as, if I could have used it on daily basis. So what I want to come to is that motivation is very important. I see it with bilingual children all the time, and it's something that if it's not there, it's very hard to create. So good motivation is going to be a push to learn language. Zero motivation, I'm sorry, but not going to help a lot. Something else that I want to talk about is the method. How you learn a language is going to have a big effect on whether it's going to be harder or easier for you. And you have to take into account that everyone learns by different methods. But in my opinion, the more interactive a method is, the more realistic and relatable to a language, the easier it is. So I've always had problems with learning languages that are very focused on a class, on learning by heart, on memory, on just reading from a list. If you really focus on using that language, on talking to people that speak the language, or to listening to media that is shared in that language, that can also have a big effect on whether a language is hard or easier for you to learn. So something else that is very important when you learn a language and when you want to make it easier for you. So let's say that you want to learn a language that you know is very different from what you know. How can you make it easier? So a strategy in that case is to look for similarities. Of course, we've agreed that there is a big difference between what you know and what you're going to learn, but there is always some patterns that you can sort of look for. So for instance, is there some sort of similarities or overlapping with the syllable systems? Are some syllables similar to those in your own language? The phonetics, so the sounds. Is there anything that you can use from your repertoire of a language that you speak that maybe you've learned later on that can help you learn another language? Something that can help you a lot as well is just the alphabet. Is it a different alphabet? Can you learn the alphabet by using some resources that you've learned somewhere in the past? Imagine that you're going to learn Japanese or Chinese and you have to learn different alphabets and different letters from the ones that you know. Are you a good drawer? Do you know how to draw? Maybe that can help you learn the symbols of another language. There is a bunch of things that you can always look for and are going to help you make something that is very hard, very easy. So for instance, another example is Japanese and Spanish. The first thing that you can think about those two languages is that they have nothing to do with each other. And it's true to a certain extent. But for instance, if you think about Japanese, it can be very easy for Spanish speakers to pronounce because the structure in the syllables in the words in Japanese is consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. So ta, ka, pa, all those kind of things. That's exactly the same syllable system that exists in Spanish. So there you go. Another fun fact. So imagine you want to learn Korean or Chinese. They're both languages that are based on tones. What do we mean by tone? That a syllable can mean very different things depending on whether it has a low or a high pitch. Okay? So something that you might not know yet is that musicians are very good at learning tonal languages because they have very good sensitivity to tone. So are you good at playing instruments or singing? Maybe you're good at Chinese. So just to summarize, is there an easy or a hard language to learn? It really depends. You can make something easier if you just have mechanisms you can use to make the tasks more accessible to you. Now that you know all the tricks to learn another language, I'm gonna go and get myself some more tea. So thank you for listening. Arigato.